Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, March the 1st, 2024. I remember my first year at university, I think might even my first term. It was at the London School of Economics, and there was this display, I think it was in the Students' Union, or a building used by the Students' Union, about El Salvador and the atrocities in El Salvador. So this would have been probably 1981, end of 1981. And so during 1981, if you were around in 1981 and you were looking at what was happening in the world in 1981, one of the big stories was the civil war in El Salvador, the right-wing death squads, and of course US intervention in Central America, doing whatever it can to stem the supposed spread of communism. Of course, remember a few years later we had the Iran-Contra scandal, which where America was trying to support the Contras in Nicaragua. But yes, since sort of 1981, there was this display, I assume, put up by students talking about everything that was going on in El Salvador and how horrific it was, and these right-wing death squads would kill sort of students, protesters, peasants, and priests. And so El Salvador is what I want to talk about. I mean, the reason I wanted to talk about El Salvador is sort of quite profane, not very sacred. It was I was just looking at the price of Bitcoin, and I noticed that Bitcoin is now over $60,000. Bitcoin seems to have really recovered from the Bitcoin, the FTX crisis, the Sam Bankman-Fried and all that. It's pretty close to its all-time high. I think didn't it get to 70,000 at the end of 2021? Now, Bitcoin is important for El Salvador because El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele, has made Bitcoin one of El Salvador's official currencies, and indeed the government of El Salvador has some of its resources in Bitcoin, and for a long time El Salvador was being mocked for putting so much emphasis on Bitcoin. And now the sort of question is, now who's laughing? I think the amount of money that El Salvador has put in Bitcoin is now, I don't know, I said up by about 50%. I think their break-even price is $40-something thousand. So Bitcoin is now at 60,000. So El Salvador's doing well. I think it's starting to have a favorable impact on the economy. I think the El Salvador bonds are now selling for 80% of face value. Now, it sounds bad, but apparently that's pretty good. I mean, so if you think about it, if someone's prepared to pay 80% for a price of a bond, they probably don't think that the government's going to go bust. And of course, Bitcoin tech entrepreneurs have been moving to El Salvador. So that, I thought, would be a good opportunity to look at the horoscope of the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele. Which brings me on to the subject of an even more famous person from El Salvador, who is Oscar Romero. So Oscar Romero was I think he was the Archbishop of San Salvador. He, at the time of the death squads, at the time of the El Salvador sort of civil war. I must say, I don't really know a great deal about the details of El Salvador, so forgive me if I've got sort of something wrong. But one of his colleagues was murdered in 1977, and that seemed to have another priest. And Rutilio Grande Garcia was murdered on March 12th, 1977. And this really affected Oscar Romero. And he was considered to be a social conservative, but he started to become more focused on issues of justice. And I think on March 23rd, 1980, he gave his talk on the radio, calling on the El Salvador army to stop their repression. I think particularly calling on soldiers in the army to not to do what they're doing. And of course, the government didn't take kindly to that. And on March 24th, he was murdered just after saying mass. And in the end, he was canonized. It took a long time for him to be canonized. I think perhaps the reason being that the Pope at the time was John Paul II, and I think John Paul II was from Poland, and basically all of John Paul II's, a lot of his focus was on repression by communists, particularly in Eastern Europe, and communist regimes. When it came to South America and the fact that those looking for, many of those people fighting for freedom were priests. So there was this concept of liberation theology, and the priests were, I think a lot of priests were associated with communists, and I think that's perhaps one reason why John Paul II perhaps wasn't as enthusiastic about about Romero's canonization, and as perhaps one might have expected. He didn't want to break the unity of the church. But yeah, in the end, Oscar Romero was canonized. So those are two charts I want to look at. I'm not saying that I get much from these charts. I looked at their transits and directions, and I didn't really get much from either, even though I have time charts. Still, I did find something really surprising, which I think maybe it's worthwhile, staying on to the end to hear. It's really, really interesting what I discovered. It relates to Chiron, actually. Really impressive. Before I do all that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, March the 1st, 2024. So there, the picture on the left, that is Nayib Bukele, and on the right, that is Oscar Romero. So here's the position of the planets for today, March 1st, 2024. I've set the chart for noon in New York as a matter of convenience. There's no particular reason why it has to be New York. So you can see that the moon continues to be in Scorpio, 19 Scorpio at noon. So what's happening is the moon is moving into the center of the sign. It's moving out of the first half. In other words, it's moving out of the Via Combusta. So the moon at the Via Combusta is from 15 Libra to 15 Scorpio. When the moon is in the Via Combusta, we can sometimes sort of expect things not to work out as planned. We've made plans, but they have to be changed at the last minute. Things just don't turn out as expected. It happens every month. It's not such a big event. But yes, the moon is moving out of the Via Combusta. So some of us might experience a certain amount of stability. Maybe things are going to be more predictable. Maybe. But still, the moon continues to move through Scorpio. So everything I've said about Scorpio sort of yesterday applies for today. When the moon is in Scorpio, the focus tends to be on emotion, our feelings, the way we feel, the way we react to our feelings. Perhaps some of us are going to be a bit brooding. We're not going to want to express our feelings. Even if our feelings are very powerful, we may feel that we kind of want to keep them to ourselves. At least that might be our first instinct. And now the moon, while the moon is in Scorpio, the sun is in Pisces. Of course, the sun has been in Pisces for quite some time, getting on for a fortnight. But the moon is in a water sign, the sun is in a water sign. So when you've got the sun and the moon both in a water sign, or both in the same element, but in different signs, not the same sign, but we know. So when you've got, for example, the moon in Scorpio, sun in Pisces, or I don't know, could be the moon in Sagittarius, sun in Aries, whatever. They have an 120 degree relationship. Even if they're not exactly 120 degrees apart, they're in signs that are of the same element but are different, and that does create a certain amount of harmony. So, Ptolemy, writing nearly 2,000 years ago, talking about favourable aspects between the sun and the moon, he said that it was good for survival for a newborn baby, because obviously 2,000 years ago, childhood, surviving birth was often quite tough, or early childhood. And Ptolemy reckoned that, when you've got the sun and the moon in sort of a trine or a sextile aspect, I can't remember precisely what he said, something like that, then it improves the chances of survival. Of course, survival, that kind of thing, is not an issue today in most places, but still it's good for the life force, having the moon trine the sun. And the moon trine the sun, it kind of takes off some of the edge of the Scorpio intensity. We can sort of relate to the world. We can find somewhere where we feel familiar, where we feel comfortable and familiar. There are other aspects involving the moon. The moon does make an opposition to Jupiter. You can see there's the moon in Scorpio. The moon is opposition Uranus. Its moon is opposition Jupiter. So the moon opposition Jupiter and Uranus, that can create a bit of tension. There's something we need to express, but we kind of somehow feel we maybe can't express, at least not to begin with. It's perhaps a feeling that something is not quite right, but we want to tell the world what we feel. And so we're going to be very good at putting not just ourselves on edge, but other people on edge. Now, that kind of might contradict what I was saying about harmony, but maybe with this moon trine the sun, it's about feeling tense, but finding a resolution. We can find a way to express ourselves perhaps in quite a subtle way, a way that might not be immediately obvious, but nonetheless, it's in a way that makes everyone feel a whole lot better. I suppose if we look at the overall broad picture, we can actually see a configuration here. The T-square, there is a T-square today. There's the moon opposition Uranus, and there is Venus on the T. So you can see that moon is square Venus, and it's actually square Mars is on the T, arguably, as well. So moon is square Venus and Mars, and moon is opposition Uranus, and Venus and Mars are sort of square Uranus. So with this T square, that does indicate tension, but it also indicates a resolution, and perhaps the resolution is about interacting with one particular person, finding someone we can talk to, or finding a small group of people we can express the way we feel. Now, you can't tell. That doesn't mean just choosing some random stranger and telling them how we feel. There may be someone we need to explain things to, and that may be something that we have to consider. Finally, Mercury is semi-sextile Mars. So it's not finally. There's another aspect which is just as important, more important actually, as Sun sextile Jupiter, but just Mercury semi-sextile Mars. So you see, there is Mercury, 1340 Pisces. There's Mars at 1328 Aquarius. So you've got a planet in Pisces, semi-sextile, a planet in Aquarius. In other words, they're exactly 30 degrees apart. It can be quite a difficult aspect because Mercury in Pisces is trying to think, it's trying to communicate in its own sort of way, and it's quite a complicated way of communicating because it's in Pisces. Mercury in Pisces tends to communicate in a more sort of emotional way. It tries to be sensitive. That sensitivity can upset the mental and intellectual processes sometimes because Mercury is in Pisces. But then it's semi-sextile Mars. It's having to deal with an irritation. We're trying to work out how to deal with it. It's hard because Mars in Aquarius is working in a completely different way from Mercury in Pisces. Mars in Aquarius is in an air sign. It's about ideas. It's about perhaps being angry about these ideas. And so how do we deal with this conflict? There is a way. So it's about balancing sensitivity with the anger of ideas, if that makes sense. Now, another aspect, which is probably the most important aspect of the day, is a sextile between the Sun and Jupiter. This aspect is fortunate. The Sun is a life force. Jupiter represents our vision. It's our optimism. So we can find ways of expressing our vision of the world. Things can work. Now, it is a sextile, though. A sextile is not like a trine. There is a bit of hard work is required with a sextile. It's not like a square where it's real tension, but it's hard work. That's because a sextile relates to a number 6, which is 3 times 2. So 3 represents sort of ease, and 2 represents conflict. So we can easily deal with some of the conflicts around us and put that together, and that creates talent. And so with a bit of effort, with a bit of talent, that Sun sextile Jupiter can bring some really good results today for all of us. Doesn't matter what our sign is. So that's the overall picture for today. I now want to look at the 12 signs. Now, before I talk about the 12 signs, I always read the comments on this when I do a video, and I think a lot of people are confused about whether or not they should look at the 12 signs in terms of their ascendant or their sun sign, or perhaps even their moon sign. And I think people have asked, what do I suggest? And it is a difficult one, because when for 12 years I worked as I had this contract with a cell phone company in the UK, doing forecasts of the 12 signs, and my assumption was that my assumption was basically that it was through people's star sign, people's sun signs. That was my assumption underlying it. That was when did I do that? Between 1996 and 2008 was when I was doing it. So I suppose that was quite a long time ago. People had moved on, and the assumption was that people didn't know their moon sign or their ascendant sign. When the first sun sign column was was produced in the 1930s, people did not know their ascendant sign or their moon sign. They didn't have the internet. Now we've got a situation where everyone who is interested in astrology, who, for example, if you're looking at this site, if you're looking at this video, you're interested enough to go to some free horoscope calculator and find out what your moon sign is and what your ascendant sign is. So everyone who's interested probably knows their ascendant sign and their moon sign. And indeed, that's, I suppose in some ways that's always been the case, because I don't think I've ever done a chart for someone who they haven't known their time of birth. So yeah, anyone who's interested in astrology seems to know their time of birth, although I understand that some people don't know their time of birth. So what's my advice? What should you look at? Well, I think you should look at what you feel most comfortable with. I'm certainly not telling you to look at what is most comfortable, but it's very instinctive for me to say, to use it in terms of a star sign. If you listen to some of my previous forecasts of a star sign, I often say star sign, and then I try and correct myself. It's almost instinctive for me to say star sign. But really, it is what you feel most comfortable with. And I suppose if you know your ascendant sign, the sign of your ascendant, which you probably do, then use your ascendant sign, I suppose, if that feels most comfortable. But otherwise, the sun sign should be fine. I mean, there are a couple of reasons to use the start of a sun sign, but I'm not sure I really want to go into it here. I think the issue is that you could argue that the ascendant represents the mask, that it's like how we go through when we go through the world. It is the mask, and that perhaps the sun is the real person. But then you could say it might be the moon as well. So it starts to get quite complicated. So I think the simple answer is whatever you feel most comfortable with. And I don't want to tell you what you should do, but I probably need to have a video where I go into this matter in greater detail. So sorry to sort of leave it in the air. It would be very easy if I could tell you what to do. Oh, by the way, if by any chance you don't know what your ascendant is, but you have your time of birth, then of course just ask in the comments. Just say what your time is and your date of birth and your place of birth. Okay, you probably don't want to reveal all that, but if you were to reveal that, then I'm happy to. Then I'm sure someone is happy to tell you what it is. It doesn't because this information is available. God, you can even send me an email and I'll tell you. It's up to you. But I think most people do know their time of birth. It's and there are websites. Astro.com, for example, has a free horoscope calculator, so it shouldn't be much of a problem. Anyway, I've been talking too much. So what I really wanted to do now was look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, March the 1st, 2024. Aries. Today you are in a pivotal position. Everything seems to come back to you, even if that's not what you intended. I know that the moon is moving through Scorpio. So, like from an Aries perspective, when the moon is moving through Scorpio, it tends to be a time when you're quite introspective, when you're not really focused on the outside world. You've got powerful feelings at the moment, Aries, which you feel they need to be nurtured. If you're with other people, you might sort of lose your sense of equilibrium. Nonetheless, Aries, the world is not ignoring you. You might want to be ignored, but you're not being ignored. The moon in Scorpio is making a square to Mars. Your Mars is Mars is in Aquarius, and Mars is your ruling planet. So you are engaging here. You can't help but engage, and you can see that in the world around you, there are some powerful forces playing out, and I think there may be an expectation on you to actually do something. That might not be something you want to do, but it may be there may be a certain sense of responsibility here. It's like the world's tension is starting to get really intense. And yes, something has to give, and maybe you're the person to manage it. So if you're in a position of any responsibility, whether it's in your social life, in your family, at work, whatever it is, there may be something you need to resolve. And I really do think that you can resolve it. It requires a bit of dynamism on your part. At first, you might feel that dynamism is inappropriate. But don't underestimate yourself, Aries. You are a power keg today. Not a power keg that is immediately obvious. There may be other people out there who are making more noise, who appear to be making a bigger impression. But deep down, Aries, there is something going on, and you're in a position really to create some big changes. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, there's this conjunction between Venus and Mars, which has been going on for a long time, is separating. It's in Aquarius, and it is about relating, because Mars is your ruler, Venus is the ruler of Libra, your opposite sign. So this conjunction between Venus and Mars is still there, and it's reactivated today by the moon in Scorpio, because what happens is that the moon makes a square to Mars, and then it makes a square to Venus. So when you're with other people, or when you're close to other people, the emotions naturally start to rise, and that could be about any number of relationships or types of relationship. You don't even have to know someone very well to feel that the emotional content, and now that emotional content could be tense. You might start getting close to someone. I mean, it may be someone, I don't know, on a bus. This person sitting two rows of seats ahead of you. You just feel something between you and that person. It might just be animosity, for example. It could be a clash, but there's still something going on emotionally there. Now, in that case, of course, when you get off the bus, then you'll never see that person again, and it doesn't really matter. But there may be other people who you're just aware that there is an emotional connection there, an emotional connection which may actually be quite tense, because connections aren't always positive. And I suppose if you're dealing with someone who you have to deal with all the time, then possibly the challenge is to address this tension and to work out how best to sort of unwind it, because it is about unwinding today. As I said at the beginning, at the beginning of this piece on the positions of the planets today, there is a T-square, and Mars is on the T. Mars is, making the square to the moon, and it's starting to make a square to Uranus. Now that's not something it's not going to be exact for over a week, but you can feel something, and if you can somehow find a way of resolving it, maybe just a little bit of self-expression is all it takes, because if you say something that's on your mind in that sort of normal Aries impulsive way, you might get some feedback, then you can say something back, then there might be a conversation. Okay, it may be an argument, but maybe it could be a constructive argument. And so I think today, overall, Aries, you may not be in the mood for social interaction, but I think that there can be, at some level, some kind of resolution. Taurus. Well, the moon continues to move through Scorpio, which is your opposite sign. So that does mean that relationships continue to be important. Relationships with the other, whoever the other is, people out there, maybe even organizations out there, anything that you don't have control over. And so you might feel that whatever you're doing, you do have to consider the other, even if you don't want to. You are fairly independent-minded at the moment, but then there are limits to your independent-mindedness, or there are limits to your capacity for independence, because you're having to deal with the other. But I think it's important that you don't exaggerate. The moon is, while it may be in Scorpio, it's making a fortunate aspect to the sun, or at the very least, the sun is in Pisces, the moon is in Scorpio. That does create a certain sense of harmony, and from a sort of a Taurean point of view, that harmony is about bringing different people together and understanding their role in your life. Sometimes you might be wondering, why are you interacting with a particular person? What's the point? What does it achieve? And today you can perhaps start to understand how things are working and why someone is in your life. Maybe they're not going to be in your life forever, but at the moment they are there. I have to point out that the moon is making an opposition to Uranus. So Uranus has been moving through Taurus for a long time, for years, and the principle of Uranus can be about rebellion. It can be about independence. It can be about doing your own thing. And, in general, this is a time in your life over the last few years. It has been important for you to be able to do your own thing. And with the moon making an opposition to Uranus, that need for independence really is really highlighted. You start to become aware of what might be stopping you from being independent, what might be stopping you from doing your own thing. And in certain circumstances, you might project that. You might suddenly take the view that there are one or two people who are really holding you up and are just preventing you from being yourself. So who are those people, and why do you believe what you believe? It may be you're mistaken. It just may be that maybe there's an internal reason why you're not doing what you want to do. Maybe it's stubbornness on your part. Maybe you haven't got the approach right. But it's easier to blame someone else for holding you up. So if you're in a situation where you feel you're being held up and you're feeling that it's actually someone else causing the problem, think again. Okay, you may be right. I'm not saying you're not right, but it just may be that it's a situation where if you really were to show your independence, really show your independence, then you would be able to do what you wanted. And perhaps you've been unwilling to fully show your independence. And perhaps today that is a challenge for you. Still, as far as relationships are concerned, I can't deny that there could be some issues today. Reason being, Moon is in Scorpio, your opposite sign. It is making a square to Mars. It's making a square to Venus. That can represent issues with people on a one-to-one level. There may be scope for argument. It may be that you and someone else are very stubborn and you cannot compromise. Also, if you are dealing with issues of authority, whether it's you in a position of authority or whether it's someone else in a position of authority, there is a danger of a misunderstanding, or someone standing up against authority. And is it you standing up against authority, or are you the authority figure being challenged? So one of those two possibilities could occur, in which case I think you have to make a special effort to be reasonable and diplomatic, and you need to make the most of the underlying energies. Remember, Moon is in Scorpio, Sun is in Pisces, and I said in the introduction to my sign forecast that the Moon trine Sun is about harmony, and with the right moves, with a bit of a conciliatory approach. That's what you should try to take. Okay, you can be independent, but you can also be conciliatory. Perhaps that's part of your challenge. And harmony is important. Be independent, but also have a harmonious relationship with the rest of the world. It really is possible. Gemini, you possibly feel that there is work to be done. Work that it has to be done now. It may feel that it's that you can't really get outside help. I mean, you'd like to ask for help, but you don't really think that it's appropriate. And maybe there's a certain sense, Gemini, in which you are valuing your own privacy. I know that Gemini is not a sign that is completely obsessed about privacy, but I think today that could be quite important. Privacy, not because you're afraid of revealing secrets, it's because you may feel that you're going to be more effective if you are on your own, working on whatever you need to work on, and I think that's fine. And I think also with the fact that the Moon in Scorpio is actually making a trine aspect to Mercury. So Mercury is your ruler, and Mercury's in Pisces, and Mercury is in an how should I put it? It's in an improving position. A few days ago, Mercury's position was pretty difficult, but things are getting better. The Mercury is moving away from the Sun. So when Mercury is exactly conjunct the Sun, it's feeling a bit combust. You're feeling that something is really hemming you in, or at worst, sort of burning you up. The Sun is, it's a ball of fire. And so if we get too close to the sun, we feel that we can't see what's going on, and it's, our vision gets distorted. But Mercury, yeah, it is moving away from the sun. The moon is making a trine aspect to Mercury. And, actually for some Geminis, there may be a certain sense of convalescence, feeling that there was something difficult in the past, but now we're starting to get over it, and we're able to get back into our groove, and our constructive efforts may not get immediate recognition, but I think they will get recognition. This is a time, Gemini, when people are noticing what you're doing. They may not say that they may not say that they're noticing what you're doing, but they actually are. And that means that your efforts perhaps your private efforts that may feel unrewarded and unrecognized, they are feeding into something else, and so just keep working away, and Gemini, you will in the end be rewarded. Now, from an authority perspective, if you happen to be in a position of authority, then Gemini, if you feel it necessary, you can establish this authority. If you want to be taken seriously, I think in most cases you're not going to want to be taken that seriously. But if you want to be taken seriously, if you want people to listen to you, if you want people to stop what they're doing and say, "Yeah, Gemini knows what they're talking about," yeah, it can happen. It will happen if that's what you if that's what you want. So don't be afraid of demonstrating your authority in any situation. If you feel that there's a need, then your words are going to sound very convincing, and yes, I think that people will take you seriously. Finishing up with relationships, I don't think it need be a bad day. Now, you may not feel like engaging with people on a one-to-one level, but if you want to engage with people on a one-to-one level, I think you really can. By doing something slightly unexpected, then you can actually get closer to someone. And I'm not saying you have to take some embarrassing initiative or anything like that, but just doing something that is slightly out of the ordinary, you can create a sense of community. So that's not just about one-to-one relationships. It may be about a relationship between a group of people. So perhaps it's up to you to take an initiative that wasn't being planned for, but it's an initiative that I think will get a favourable response. So in two ways, Gemini, and I talked about you as an authority figure, and I'd also talked about you as someone who can create a sense of community and oneness. You have a bit of a choice. I think left to your own devices, you probably just want to go on and do things your way and not engage too much with other people. But there are other alternatives. There are other alternative possibilities. And it really, Gemini, it's up to you. And perhaps really that's the overall message of today, Gemini. It is up to you. Cancer. There is, Cancer, a certain sense of harmony. I talked about the moon being trine the sun, or at least the moon being in Scorpio and the sun being in Pisces, and they're in this trine relationship. The trine may not be exact. It does, to an extent, depend on your time zone. But you are a force for good today, and you are someone who is in a position to create harmony. You can create harmony just by being yourself, just by being there. You can also create harmony by the things you say. Of course, you have to think about what you're saying. Your job is not to say things which are shocking. At least if you want to keep the harmony, it's not a time for shocking people, but just gentle words, gentle reassurance. It may just be small talk. It may just be, "Hello, how are you? I'm fine." But your words have a pleasantness to them, or they can have a pleasantness to them. After all, the moon is your ruler, and it's making a fortunate aspect not just to the sun but to Mercury as well. Yet that's not the only aspect the moon is making. The moon is making an opposition to Uranus. So this opposition to Uranus, it does happen. It does happen every month, but I suppose it's not particularly harmonious. So I've just talked about your capacity for creating harmony. You can do it, but you also have a capacity for being quite unsettling. And that is because the moon is opposition Uranus. So you might feel that something isn't right, and that a change is required. It may be that you've got this clash between your own creative impulse. You want to be creative in your own way, yet there is resistance. You may feel that not everyone appreciates what you're doing. You may feel that there's pressure to do something else, and under those circumstances you might react. You might do something that no one's expecting, and everyone is minding their own business. They think everything's calm, and then suddenly Cancer gets annoyed about something. That is a possibility. Or it is about how you respond to the day's events. And with moon opposition Uranus, there may be particular events which grab your attention. You just cannot ignore these events. You just feel you have to respond, and your response may be quite strong, stronger than you expected. Remember, it's not just that the moon is opposition Uranus. The moon, your ruler, is also square Mars, and so moon opposition Uranus, square Mars, can be quite angry. So again, I'm starting to contradict myself, because I talked about harmony at the beginning of this piece. It's there. The harmony is there. Left to your own devices, if nothing, everything is harmonious if everything goes to plan. But if something doesn't go to plan, if something happens that wasn't in the script, then things change. And you have to start. You start responding to this unexpected event, unexpected situation, and that's where the trouble starts. Or is it trouble? Maybe it's the right thing. Maybe there are some people who have just got complacent, and they really haven't really worked out how they're going to deal with change. And now that change happens, you have to start to harness that change. And you can't harness change without causing a bit of disruption. So that's something that you're going to have to take on board. Also, also Cancer, you are someone who is emotionally very sensitive. You're in tune with your emotions. But I think it's going to be very clear to you that some people are not in tune with their emotions. That some people are just not understanding the overall situation and not understanding perhaps the gravity of the overall situation, and you may be bothered by their response. Perhaps there are certain people who are being too cold and intellectual and detached, and that could irritate you, and that may be another cause for argument and disruption. But overall, Cancer, you are in control. I really must emphasize. And you must see yourself as being in control. Whatever happens today, it's down to you. And how you respond to the today's events, again, it's up to you. So when you respond to something going on out there, I know the natural inclination is just to respond immediately, but just have a little bit of thought about what you're doing, why you're responding, and consider what the implications could be. Leo. It's a day, Leo, when you probably feel that you don't have to do much. I think that's your first inclination. You perhaps feel that it's a world that is quite hectic, but you might feel separate from it. You might take the view that you've done what you have to do, and you can just maybe just sit back and watch. I think in some respects you're right. I do understand, Leo, that at the moment you have quite strong feelings. You kind of regard the world as being quite complicated. You're aware that there are people out there who are just making things a lot more complicated than they should be. So why should you get involved? Why should you take risks? But there may be a certain responsibility on your part. What you perhaps need to do is try to simplify things, not just for yourself, but also for other people. You can bring people down to earth, actually. And it might not feel like that, but if you find that things are getting complicated today, and that someone is making things complicated, then you're able to step in if you want to, if you can be motivated, and almost demand that things are simplified. Because if you don't understand what's happening, then it's going to undermine you in the end. You need to know what's going on, and you need other people to think about what's going on. And with the moon making a trine to the sun, which, as I've said to several other signs, and in general I've talked about it, is about harmony. You are in a position to create harmony, and when you're dealing with people who are just taking themselves too seriously. If someone's taking themselves too seriously, you have to bring them down to earth if you can. Now, if someone insists on being taken seriously, then maybe you should have nothing more to do with them, at least in the short term. Especially as the sun, your ruler, it remains conjunct Mercury and Saturn. Now the Sun has been conjunct the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. The Sun has been conjunct the Mercury-Saturn midpoint for a long time, days. And I've talked about this before. I've talked about the fact that the Sun on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint is about farewells. It's about saying goodbye. It's about creating distance. That makes sense. Mercury is about communication. Saturn is about breaking something off, limits, restrictions, boundaries. So if you find that someone is making things complicated and is refusing to compromise, is refusing to listen, then do you need to deal with them anymore? Then you can perhaps cut off your contacts with them. Okay, maybe not forever, but at least until this situation has resolved itself. Because the last thing you want today is complicated people who refuse to talk. Absolutely, you do not want these people around, because they're not going to make your life any easier. Well, I said not any easier. You can have an easy life today, provided you don't have complicated, brooding people around you. And you certainly don't want to be a complicated, brooding person yourself. I suppose that's possible. The moon is in Scorpio. The moon is in a section of your chart which can be quite introspective. And Leo is a fixed sign. The moon is in Scorpio. It's in a fixed sign. Consider how other people are seeing you. Are they thinking that you're complicated? You don't want them to think that you're complicated. You want to give the impression that you are a straightforward person. And with the moon making a trine aspect with Mercury today, you have the opportunity to explain. And that's something you should try to do. You don't have to explain in massive detail. In fact, you shouldn't explain in massive detail. Just say what it is, a few sentences, that's all it takes. And while you're speaking, you can use your feelings. Use your feelings to work out the best way of the best way of expressing yourself. Sort of finally, I suppose I should really talk a little bit more about relationships. So the moon is making square aspects to Venus and Mars. Venus and Mars are in Aquarius, which is your opposite sign. That could have something to do with relationships, how you relate to people. And I think the challenge here is to be open. It's kind of what I've been saying before. You don't want people to be asking questions. And in close relationships, it's particularly important that people aren't asking questions. You don't want people to be in a position where they don't know what you're thinking. That doesn't mean to say that you have to tell them exactly every dark thought you have, but you don't want people to be wondering about you. So I think the more you behave in a transparent way, I think the easier relationships are going to be. Virgo. So Virgo, there continues to be a lot of emphasis on Pisces, which is your opposite sign. In astrology, the opposite sign is often related to other people. There continue to be 4 planets in Pisces: Saturn, Sun, Mercury, and Neptune. And the moon is in Scorpio. And from a Virgo perspective, I think that you do have an ability to really communicate. I mean, I think I said this yesterday. You can get people to talk, and the moon is actually it's making a trine aspect to Mercury. Of course, it depends on your time zone, but there is a trine relationship between the moon and Mercury because the moon is in Scorpio, which is a water sign. Mercury is in Pisces, which is a water sign. So there's a good relationship there between the moon and Mercury. So you are in an ability. You do have the ability to get people to talk. I think actually people do want to talk, and you actually don't have to do much talking yourself. You just have to provide a little bit of stimulation, ask a couple of questions, and then the words will come flowing, and it will all be very easy. And so I think it could be a very good day, for example, if you're a Virgo, I don't know, psychotherapist. But, we can all be amateur psychotherapists, can't we? Well, if we're a Virgo. I'm not a Virgo. But Virgos can be good amateur psychotherapists today. And you don't have to put in any personal input. You don't have to reveal anything about yourself. There's no pressure to reveal anything. Just keep it to yourself. Let other people take the initiative. In general, today, it's just so much easier when other people are taking the initiative. You put in a little, and then you get a lot out. So, in that sense, I think it could be quite a fortunate day. Yet, I should point out that the moon is making an opposition to Uranus. So, with the moon making an opposition to Uranus, there may be some challenges. I think the challenges may be about your own particular view of the world. So if you're a Virgo, the world can sometimes seem quite complicated, and you're in a position where you're trying to constantly create order. Order in a sea of chaos. That can be how Virgo works, remembering that Virgo is opposite Pisces. So Pisces is a sea, and there's always Virgo trying to create order. And something may happen from outside, moon opposition Uranus, which actually challenges you. You think you've worked everything out. You think your ideas are all in order. And then suddenly something comes in and says, no, you haven't got it right at all. It's like this. So how do you deal with a challenging idea? You could deal with it in quite an angry way. You could say, no, you've got it wrong. My way is the right way. But that's not the right approach. Ideas are there to challenge. Uranus is in Taurus. Uranus has been in Taurus for a long time. From a Virgo perspective, that Uranus is about new ideas. And I suspect in many cases, for Virgo, for the last few years, there have been challenging ideas. Every now and then you're forced to stop and think. And it's not very nice to have to sort of start again on something you've been working on, at least particularly on an intellectual level. But you have to deal with these challenges, these philosophical challenges. There may be spiritual challenges as well. Having a set of beliefs, or perhaps being comfortable in having no beliefs at all, and then something happening which is forcing you to think about beliefs all over again. And you can handle it, and you can grow from this. This is what you're supposed to be doing. So don't be completely set in your ways today. And if you have to make a few changes to some of your ideas, you should welcome this rather than fight against it. Libra. The moon is in Scorpio, which is a sign following Libra. Very often when the moon is in Scorpio, Libra, it can be about what you own. It can be about money. So don't ignore the financial dimension today. It may matter. It's probably something that you're not particularly interested in at first sight. It's not something you really want to have to bother with. But it kind of is bothering you a bit. So maybe you are thinking about what you have and what you don't have. Maybe you're thinking about what other people have and don't have. In certain cases, Libra, you might find a little tinge of jealousy. There's nothing to be ashamed of, having a bit of jealousy. We're all jealous, actually, all of us. We all get jealous of people having stuff that we don't have. I suppose it's a part of the human condition. And it sounds very tedious to be jealous to be jealous about someone owning something that we don't own, having money that we don't have. That sounds awful, but we all do it. To be honest, isn't that right? So you are aware, I think, today of what you have and what you don't have, and there may be particular events which drive this home. I mean, after all, today there is an opposition aspect between the moon and Uranus, which hits the finance axis of your chart. So events happen which make you think about money, which make you think about how much money you've got, your financial stability. Also, which may make you think about other people's money. So do look out for those events, but don't let this distract you. You have got other things to be doing. You're here on this planet to be an individual. You've got your own individual path, and indeed, it's your own individual destiny. And in some respects, your material condition right now is about what you wanted. It's right for you, and if you're worrying too much about your material condition, then you may be distracted from your fundamental purpose. And today, your fundamental purpose does matter. You should be doing stuff which is all about you. And financial aspects may be a distraction, although it is possible, in a creative sense, that with the moon making a square aspect to Venus. Remember, Venus is your ruling planet, and at the moment Venus is in Aquarius. So with Venus being in Aquarius, remembering Venus, Aquarius is an air sign, Libra is an air sign, so Venus is in an element that's very concordant with your own sign. You are really able to tune into your own creativity and your own independence, your independent creativity. But with Moon square Venus, you may be considering how much your creativity costs. It may be that there are certain things you want to do that cost money. and you are concerned about how that money is going to, how you're going to get that money. So what's the answer? Well, for a start, if something is truly creative, is truly you, then it's not an issue of money. You just have to, you are yourself. We shouldn't have money. What did Christ say? Something about the birds. Look at the birds. They feed when they want to feed. So something like that. The birds are free. The birds don't have to buy anything. They just feed when they want to feed. So maybe it's a bit like that with Libra. On the other hand, if you really, really need something to be yourself, and it has a price tag, then don't get too upset about it, because if you really need it, then you will have an opportunity to get it. It might be a bit of a challenge to get it. Maybe you can get it for free. Maybe the money you need to get it will materialize. If the money doesn't materialize, and if you can't get it for free, then possibly you don't need it anyway. So do consider that. And overall today, just don't get too tied up with what you have and what you don't have, and realize that what you really have, what you always have, the thing you've got, the thing you were born with, the thing that can never be taken away from is your creativity. And today, you continue to be creative, and it's just that your creativity might be challenged by this material concern, but it may just be a distraction. Scorpio. The moon is still in your star sign, or I've done it again. It's the ascendant sign or the moon sign. It depends, and I really want to stress that. I don't want to say you have to look at things from a perspective of your sun sign, because most people know their ascendant. But I do need to make a video about this, really getting into my view about whether or not you should use your sun sign or your moon sign or your ascendant sign. So yeah, the moon continues to move through your sign, and it's easier, I think, than yesterday, because what's happening, Scorpio, is that the moon is now moving out of the Via Combusta. So the first half of Scorpio is a little bit unstable when the moon is in there. I mean, I'm not saying for you, but when the moon is moving through the first part of Scorpio, things can just happen, which you weren't really expecting. And I think overall there is going to be increased stability, especially if you are in a stable environment and you're making a special effort to keep yourself to yourself. But I can't deny the fact that the moon is making an opposition to Uranus. So the moon is in Scorpio and it's making an opposition to Uranus in Taurus. And so Uranus is in Taurus, which is your opposite sign. So if you've got, with this moon opposition Taurus, other people may be a bit of a law unto themselves. So what you mustn't do is make assumptions about anyone. People do what they do. They do strange things. Who knows why? Don't make assumptions. If you've got plans, don't make assumptions. Don't assume that people will behave in a way you were expecting. Everyone is an individual. Everyone is just as individual as you are. And it would be nice if everything ran according to a script, but things are not going to run according to a script, and you should expect certain people to do things which really are not part of that script. Now, the moon is moving out. The moon won't be a Navir combustor when this happens, because the moon is at 19 Scorpio and Uranus is at 19 Taurus. So that means that you can deal with it. Don't think that everything has to change. You have to change just because something happens that you hadn't planned for. It's just people. People behave like that. That's the way it is, and it's going to be important that you don't get angry. For example, why should you get angry about people just being individuals, just people being themselves? In fact, Scorpio, you may be able to harness the energies of a T square. So a T square, astrologers like to talk about this thing called a T square. So a T square is when you've got two planets that are opposition each other, and then you've got one or sometimes more than one planet that is square the two planets that are opposition. So there is this T square today, but you've got Moon opposition Uranus, then you've got Venus and Mars making a square to this opposition. And the two planets making a square are often the resolution. And one of those planets is Venus, and another planet is Mars. Okay, it's not exact. You might say, well, it's 6 degrees out, but it's Mars is you, and so you might have a situation where something happens that no one was expecting, and you, with your Scorpio sensitivity, just completely understand it straight away. It's not really unexpected for you. And so you completely understand it, and then you know immediately what to do. It's obvious to you. You can have a sort of no-nonsense approach where you can bring it all down to earth, but in quite an intelligent way. Remember, Mars, your ruler, is in Aquarius. Mars, although I understand Scorpio has a reputation for being a very sort of emotional sign, Mars right now is in Aquarius. Aquarius is more of a thinking sign, and it's going to stay in Aquarius for a bit of time. It's a thinking sign, so you can rationalize for everyone around you what is happening. You can tell people, you can explain to people what's happening, and you can actually create understanding. So you might be the very person to help everyone manage change. You can bring people from one way of viewing the world to another way of viewing the world, and in the process you can actually gain for yourself a considerable amount of respect. Sagittarius. It's a day, Sagittarius, when you are probably not particularly in the mood for doing much. You can see what needs to be done. You can see when you look forward that very soon there's something that has to be done. But I don't think it's today. The moon is going through Scorpio. Okay, tomorrow the moon goes into your star sign. That's different. But right now, moon is in Scorpio. I don't think there is a lot that you have to do. Having said that, we can't deny that the sun is making a sextile to Jupiter. Now, Jupiter is your ruling planet, and the Sun is making a sextile to it. So what is it? What is the Sun about? I think the Sun is about giving yourself confidence and security. And so with the Sun sextile Jupiter, you have an opportunity to give yourself both confidence and security. And you can do this in actually quite an understated way. No one need know what's going on, but you are in a position to take quiet actions which potentially have quite a dramatic impact and are an excellent investment for the future. So when you consider what's going on, Sagittarius, ask yourself, what needs to be done today? Or rather, what can be done today? There's something you can do which is going to put you in a better position. It may be something to do with your home. You spend time in your home, and you do things in your home which make you feel comfortable. And it's not just about like short-term comfort, you know, having a comfortable Friday. You are creating the foundations for something, and really that's what Sagittarians should be doing at this time of year, with the Sun moving through Pisces. You know, from a Sagittarian perspective, Pisces is a sign that's very much connected with the home. This is where a lot of your energy should be being placed, especially on a day like this when the Sun is making a sextile to Jupiter. So your home is perhaps should be where all the action is happening. You know, if you are engaging with the outside world and you are at home, you are going to be most effective because you'll be in control, and you know you need to be in control. So Sagittarius, there are things going on under the surface which maybe no one else is going to recognize or see. And don't underestimate your own unconscious processes. Your unconscious processes are quite strong today with the moon in Scorpio, and they're moving you in a particular direction. I mean, maybe you've had dreams or daydreams recently which are telling you something. Perhaps you haven't really bothered to listen to them. Maybe you didn't write them down. Maybe you forgot them. But kind of focus on what your unconscious is telling you, because it's telling you something, and it's not being held up. I think things are coming into your conscious mind from your unconscious, which need to be taken seriously, and which can really be telling you, where you should be going. Now, this might also be about other people. The moon is making a trine to Mercury. Mercury, from a Sagittarian perspective, can represent another person. So it may be you're being told something. Someone is giving you information. Perhaps a person who has recently been keeping themselves to themselves, but they're now better able to be open. So if someone was recently been trying to tell you something, but the message got sort of garbled or they disappeared, perhaps you should give them another chance to say what they were trying to say. Maybe you need to give them a call or send them an email, asking them for clarification, because when you get that clarification, you might be very interested by what they have to say. So really that's it, Sagittarius. On the surface, not a spectacular day, but underneath, I think there are big things going on, and I think there are big things which are, really setting you up nicely for the future. And don't forget, tomorrow the moon moves into your sign. Capricorn, you maybe feel that you should be sociable and you should be interacting. It's a little bit half-hearted, but maybe you feel that's what you should be doing. I think it should work out okay. But don't be surprised if something unexpected happens, because the moon does make an opposition to Uranus. So with the moon opposition Uranus, it suggests that you probably shouldn't make assumptions about anything, but especially about the people close to you. The people close to you, they are individuals. They have their own way of working. They have their own creative and inspirational needs. And, they might do something that you weren't planning. Or they might do something that you feel uncomfortable with. This is particularly the case if you're dealing with people that you're close to, but at the same time you feel you perhaps have some authority over them. So I don't know, that could be younger members of your family, or if you're in a position of authority at work, it could be maybe employees, or it could be your friends, but friends who, if you're honest with yourself, you think you know more than they do. You feel that you're wiser than they are. And so this might be a day when you're aware of other people's irresponsibility. You can see their irresponsibility. At least their behavior seems irresponsible to you. And you may feel that if they continue with this behavior, they're going to cause some damage, perhaps just to themselves, but perhaps to you. This damage might have a financial dimension. I think you're going to be very aware of the financial mistakes that people can make. I think that's going to be clear, and that's going to upset you. So you have to work out what to do. It may be that you just do nothing. It may be that you give advice. Can you give advice? It's always difficult giving advice because some people don't want to hear your advice. But there is always a way to give advice. You just have to be subtle. The moon is making a trine to Mercury. Moon-Mercury trines are communicative, but when they're in water signs, they have to be. It's about communication which is subtle. So if you want to influence people, especially in terms of money, but just other things, if you think that people need to be given a message, you cannot give that message directly. You need to be subtle. You need to sort of use perhaps symbolic language a bit. Perhaps you don't even have to use words at all. Body language can be important there, and that might be enough. So do consider that, and don't be too possessive today. It's sometimes easy to be possessive about other people's behavior. You look at people and you feel that they're part of your world, and you therefore feel that they should be behaving in a particular way. And if they don't behave in a particular way, then you find that upsetting because they're part of your world and you expect your world to behave in a particular way. So in that sense, for some Capricorns, there is perhaps a slight danger of being a bit of a control freak, but you mean well. And I suppose that's what counts. You want the best for everyone, not just yourself. And sometimes it's necessary to be a control freak if someone is about to make a mistake. So you have to be very aware about that. And talking about money, I think money is going to be important today, but you have to talk about it in the right way. If you talk about money directly, you talk about numbers, figures, dollar signs, pound signs, wherever you are, then I think you could certainly cause offence. On the other hand, if you're subtle about it, then I think you can get people to do things your way without them knowing that they're doing things your way. So that's pretty much it. I don't think it's an especially dramatic day. I think that the main issue for you is, how do you control people? There is a way to control people. You can control people, but you have to do it right in the right way. You have to be just really subtle about it. But in the end, I think that you can manage things correctly. Just you don't want to pressurize people, make people think that they're being pressurized, because then you could end up having no control at all. Aquarius, you feel that you need to have an impact today. You feel you've definitely got something to give, something to offer. At the same time, I think you understand that it's not always going to be easy. Everything's going in a particular direction. It does seem like that. Everyone wants to go in a particular direction, and it almost seems as if they've kind of made up their mind, and there's not really much you can do. But still, you feel you do need to be in control, but you do need to exercise some control. I think this is something you can do, but you're going to have to use all your abilities, all your talents. So, one way of taking control is to be just assertive, just to tell people what's true, what's not, and just don't take any nonsense from anyone. That is an approach, and I think actually it might be quite effective. Because there is this square between the Moon and Mars and the Moon and Venus. Now, normally, when you've got a square between the Moon and Venus and Mars, there could be some issues there, because the square is supposed to be a tense aspect. But we have to remember that Venus and Mars are in your sign. Venus and Mars are in Aquarius, and the Moon is in Scorpio. I think, like I said yesterday, Scorpio, from an Aquarian perspective, is a high-profile sign, and so with the Moon squaring Venus and Mars, there's dynamic tension there, and you can use this dynamic tension to express who you are and what you want. And if you absolutely are not prepared to compromise, then I think you'll probably get away with it. People might not like having to do things your way, but I think they will do things their way. They will do things your way. The only problem with that is long term or longer term, you might be creating a bad impression. Yes, you can get people to do things your way today, but what about tomorrow? What about next week? What are they going to think about you? You might be causing resentment in the process. So, Aquarius, maybe you should consider alternative approaches. One of the themes today, astrologically, is the fact that the moon is trine the sun. Even if that trine is not exact, the point is the sun is in Pisces, the moon is in Scorpio. There's a trine relationship between Pisces and Scorpio. And trines, unlike squares, are more harmonious. And so it may be that you can get your way using a more gentle approach. It's kind of a bit like what I was saying to Capricorn, remembering that Capricorn, like Aquarius, has Saturn as its ruler. Saturn does like to be in control, but there are many different ways of getting your way, and through subtle communication, through a little bit of manipulation, verbal manipulation, Moon trine Mercury, you can start to get things. You can start to get things to. You can get things to move your way without having to cause an argument and without causing resentment. So I suppose it depends on the situation. If it's a pressing situation today where you feel you really need things to happen your way now this minute, then you can do it. Very simple. Just be dramatic, be assertive. Yes, there might be resentment, but this can't be helped. Alternatively, if you have a more sort of longer term approach and you're trying to cultivate relationships, you're trying to cultivate loyalty, then getting your way may be a more complicated process. But if you use a bit of subtlety, you can be very effective. Now, while all this is going on, you do need to bear in mind that the moon is making an opposition aspect to Uranus. Uranus is in Taurus. It's in sort of quite a low profile sector of your chart, and that indicates sort of rumblings from below, and rumblings from below may have an impact on the way you perceive your overall direction. And indeed, it may have an impact on the way you try to sort of project yourself in public. You can be projecting yourself in public, you can be out there in the world, but there's something deep down that needs to be resolved. Something needs to be changed. Because if it's not changed, then it could cause problems later on. So if you feel that rumbling, it's difficult for me to say exactly how that rumbling is going to manifest. Particularly, it may be something going on at home. It may literally be something that needs to be fixed, an item that needs to be fixed, or it may be that someone has a long-standing complaint that needs to be resolved. So work out what that rumbling actually means and spend a bit of time working out how best to resolve it. It might not be something that you really want to do, but I think you can fix it. And once you're able to fix it, then things are going to be a lot better. Finally, I should point out that the Sun is sextile Jupiter, and the Sun, from an Aquarian perspective, is ruler of your opposite sign of Leo. So Sun sextile Jupiter can be about another person. Another person who is in a process of change, but actually in quite a fortunate way. There seems to be someone out there who is lucky. Things are going their way. And you can perhaps share in that luck. And this person, if you bring them into your life, if you talk to them, they can be, they can make things better for you. They can give you a different view, and they can provide you with an optimistic opinion, which could make you feel a lot better about yourself and the world in general. Pisces. I think that you benefit from a trine aspect from between the sun and the moon. So the sun is moving through Pisces. The moon is moving through Scorpio. And this is a time, Pisces, when you can see the world in all its magnificence. I know that there's terrible things going on in the world right now. That there's always terrible things going on in the world. There are wars and everything else. But Pisces, I think you can see a different view. Despite everything, you do believe that things are going to get better. And I think that this optimism is real, and I think you need to consider the areas of your life that can be improved, that can be a source of great happiness for you, and just see what can be done. And you're also helped by the fact that the sun is sextile Jupiter. So Jupiter is your ruling planet, and the sun is moving through Pisces. So that is further scope for optimism. Now, I don't want to encourage you to just be complacent and be selfish. There can be something very selfish about optimism. Oh, well, I'm all right, the world's all right, fine, I don't have to do anything. It's about seeing the world in the best possible light, and where the world is still dark, and seeing what you can do to create improvements. Again, not just in your part of the world, but in the world in general. And being a Pisces, you are very sensitive. You're sensitive to everything. You're plugged in. Someone's pain on the other side of the globe, at some level, you can feel it. I suppose that's the same for all of us, but if you sort of take a sort of Buddhist perspective that everything is connected, that we're not going to get liberation until we are completely connected with the entire creative process. While I don't think you're going to find nirvana today, or achieve nirvana today, I think you can be as connected as you can be with the creative process. And where something is not going right, you are in a position to make it right. I mean, okay, you can't change what's going on in, I don't know, the middle of Africa or whatever, but you can change what's going on immediately in your immediate area, in your immediate environment. You can do it. And I suppose by making a change in one place, that can create a change in another place. So don't be despondent about the world, because it's your world, And today, Pisces, I do think that you can certainly make the world a better place. Um, but don't get too sidetracked by details. Um, you might feel that something happens. There's an idea that starts to manifest, an idea that you don't really want to deal with, but you have to deal with it, and you're thinking, well, how can you possibly change the world, do anything, when you've got all of these annoying facts and details exploding in your face? It's just so complicated. You've got to move beyond that, and perhaps that's what you need to do. With the moon in Scorpio, trine the sun. That's how you make sense of it all, and it's not just a personal journey, because the moon is not just trine the sun. It's trine Mercury. So Mercury is in Pisces. Mercury is in your star sign, or the sun sign, or your ascendant sign. It depends on how you want to read these interpretations. So the moon is trine Mercury, and Mercury possibly represents another person who is prepared to listen to you, or it may represent a group of people who are prepared to listen to you, or a group of people who are prepared to follow your example. Maybe that's all that it's about. And if you want to get closer to someone or a group of people on an emotional level, with this moon trine Mercury, I think that is something that you definitely can do. So Pisces, that's it. It can be quite a cosmic day for you. Just think about what you can achieve, and think about the world at large. Think about how you'd like the world to be, and just connect yourself, if you possibly can, to the whole creative process. And and I suppose if things are not right, you feel that something is not right, then see what you can do to fix it, because I think the universe will thank you. And so now we turn to the I Ching to get a different view, perhaps different from the astrology. And the question I asked is, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And I got a locked hexagram. Hexagram number 41. So if it's locked, it means there are no moving lines. We just get decrease. Now, that sounds a bit downbeat, doesn't it? Decrease. Having less of something. It may indeed be that there's something we have to give up on today. No, not give up on, just give up. There's a sense of sacrifice there. We have to consider who we are, what we are, and what is the garbage. What are the things that are just extraneous, things that we don't need, that are just clogging us up? And so perhaps we can get rid of that. Decrease may be about, I won't say throwing things away, because we've got to be kind of ecological, haven't we? We just can't throw everything into the garbage. But maybe there are certain things that physical objects that we don't need, that have been cluttering our life up for years, and that we just need to dispose of them, give them away, give them to Goodwill, or whatever the equivalent is in your country. In England, what do they give it to? Oxfam? Do they still have Oxfam shop? I suppose they do. Whatever. Giving things away. and in that way you will be making things so much clearer for yourself. And we shouldn't be thinking about immediate progress, immediate recognition. We should be comfortable with what we've got. And in terms of sacrifice, there's a sacrificial element to this, in that very often if we give something up, we get something back in return. So if we want something, maybe we need to give something away to begin with. We need to let something go to create the good fortune. And maybe that chimes with the fact that today we've got, the sun in Pisces is sextile Jupiter in Taurus. That is a very fortunate aspect, but maybe there's something sacrificial there as well, giving something up to get something better, to get something that's more worthy of who we are. And in this way, we certainly make progress. Now, there is a nuclear hexagram to this. I mean, I look at nuclear hexagrams when the hexagram is locked. So the nuclear hexagram is return. It's coming back, things returning to normal, and perhaps this underlies decrease. Maybe we've gathered too much irrelevant stuff, and I'm not just talking about material possessions. It may be about ideas that are really not going anywhere. It may be there are people that are just not really doing us any good. They're wasting our time. And perhaps the underlying hexagram here for decrease, for nuclear hexagram, is return, because, if you look at the hexagram for decrease, if you knock off the top and bottom lines, then you can see those are the top three lines broken, and then the bottom three lines have an unbroken one. So you can see that if you flick through them. So the nuclear hexagram for decrease is return. So don't hold on to things, and some things are holding us back. And if you want something good to happen, there's like a space for that good thing to happen. There's an empty space, or there should be an empty space where good fortune can come into this empty space. But maybe right now that empty space is cluttered. It's cluttered up maybe with our thoughts, people who aren't doing us any good. The physical clutter around us may be symbolic of the fact that we haven't made room for good luck. And so by emptying things out, by creating that space, by decrease, we create the possibility of getting the things that we really want. I mean, not when I say want, I don't mean that in sort of empty desire. The things that are right for us at this particular moment in our spiritual evolution and development. So now I'm going to turn to the astrology, and I'm going to look at El Salvador. Why not? As I said, I thought about El Salvador simply because I saw that Bitcoin had gone over $60,000, and I was thinking, well, that's good for El Salvador, because the government in El Salvador had, the president of El Salvador has made a couple of years ago, made Bitcoin one of the country's official currencies, and you can make official transactions in Bitcoin. And the country has got has got Bitcoin in its treasury, and it used to be a bit of an embarrassment for for El Salvador because its average price was $40,000, and so when Bitcoin went down to 20, I think Bitcoin got down to $15,000 or $16,000. People think, people were mocking El Salvador, but now that Bitcoin is over 60,000, people, at least it was last time I looked. Bitcoin can move down very quickly, can go all over the place. It's good for El Salvador, isn't it? And it's good for the bond prices. The fact that you can buy El Salvador, you have to pay over 80% of face value or 80% of face value or whatever for El Salvador bonds. So I suppose I should just look at the chart of El Salvador to begin with. I don't know where I got with 8:06 a.m. I'm not saying this 8:06 a.m. is particularly exact. I don't know. But this supposedly is one of the horoscopes for El Salvador, El Salvador's independence. And you can see that El Salvador has became independent on a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And it had Mars in Cancer. Now, Mars square Saturn. That's kind of quite a bad sign for a country to have in its chart, Mars square Saturn. And particularly that Mars is in Cancer, which is the sign of its fall, because Mars is exalted in Capricorn, and Saturn is in the sign of its is also in the sign of its fall. So that Mars square Saturn is really difficult. I know that there's a T-square here involving Venus. Venus in Libra, so Venus is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So it's really difficult. And of course, it's about death, and certainly what's been going on in El Salvador. If you think about it, since in the 1970s, there was, I think there was an attempt at some sort of often remember Nicaragua had when the Sandinistas took over Nicaragua in the late 70s. And then there was attempts by communist guerrillas to take over in El Salvador. And that led to the civil war in El Salvador, which was really absolutely vicious, where you had death squads. And you, of course, had the Archbishop of San Salvador being murdered by death squads. You, of course, had poverty at the same time, which you're going to have with the civil war. Then they finally got over the civil war, and what happened then? Then you had gang warfare. The murder rate in El Salvador went through the roof. El Salvador was, one of the most dangerous places in Central America. So that Mars-Saturn, and Central America is a pretty dangerous place at the best of times. So El Salvador was a complete disaster with this Mars square Saturn. So first you were at risk of being killed by the death squads. Then you were at risk of being killed by the gangs, and if you were trying to do business in El Salvador, there would be extortion. And one of the reasons why people flooding, coming across the border. People talk about the border. Why were people coming from El Salvador to go to the US? Well, for a long time, it was because of the chaos in El Salvador, which, why didn't the United States should have been dealing with the chaos in El Salvador, should have been trying to create some stability and peace in El Salvador, not supporting in some ways supporting the death squads. I mean, the Reagan regime, Reagan in the early 80s was pretty unpleasant. I mean, one of the people responsible for killing, who was probably responsible for killing Archbishop Romero, what's his name, de Bisson, I think he was in the El Salvador military. He was allowed into America, even though Bush and Reagan knew what he'd done. So I don't know. The United States was pretty acquiescent in terms of what was going on with the El Salvador Civil War, because they were so desperate to supposedly stop communism. But the point being that that Mars-Saturn square is a bit of a problem for El Salvador. And then El Salvador got a president, got a new president. I think he became president, I think in 2019. Nayib Bukele. So Nayib Bukele, born July the 24th, 1981. He was, I think his parents, his family, I think they were Lebanese immigrants. So perhaps his family have a slight outsider's perspective, originally coming from the Middle East. That's always the way, isn't it? The outsider always has an advantage. Okay, I understand he's completely incorporated into El Salvador. He was born in El Salvador, but maybe an immigrant family has a different perspective, and he was an effective businessman, and he made a lot of money, I think, through car dealerships. Then he became a mayor of one place, and I think mayor of San Salvador. Then he became elected president, and he is a strong man. There are a huge amount of people in prison in El Salvador. Basically, civil liberties have been sort of permanently suspended for certain people. There have been pictures of El Salvador prisons. You have these pictures of loads of people being forced to squat, sort of semi-naked in these prisons, and it's because that's the view. If you've got this crime situation was so bad that you just send everyone to prison, and you are completely brutal and pretty much let the police do what they want. Now, I don't live in El Salvador. I'm not going to express an opinion on that, but it is true that the crime rates in El Salvador have collapsed. I read somewhere that the murder rate in El Salvador, having been one of the highest in the Americas, is now less than Canada. I don't know whether that's entirely true, but so he has been dramatic, and he is a bit of a populist. I think he was speaking. He's a darling of conservatives. I think he was speaking at is it CPAC? That American conservative conference. So he was speaking at that. He's a populist, and he has tried to deal with one of the ways he's trying to deal with El Salvador's economic issues is by adopting Bitcoin. And so far, that strategy seems to be working, at least in terms of the value of El Salvador's treasury, as it's sort of gone up by 50%. It's apparently ordinary poor people don't use Bitcoin, but still, it's got him in the headlines. And so, he is a darling of the populist right, and so far, you could say that things are working out. Of course, anyone who's involved, people who are interested in human rights, are not too happy with these arbitrary arrests, these huge these people in prison, and so forth. But he's very popular. People in El Salvador think it's working. So I mean, I don't live in El Salvador, obviously. So. I'm not going to say whether it's a good or a bad thing what he's done. In many respects, he has a strong chart. What I find incredible about this chart is the fact that he has an exact Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So his Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was a 457 Libra. He was born on a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. He was born on the day of a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. We should not forget that El Salvador, that on that Independence Day, go back to the El Salvador chart, had a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So it's kind of not surprising that El Salvador has chosen as its president someone who has an exact Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Now that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was strong. Now that was the early 80s Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Now we can think of a lot of sort of celebrity reality TV kind of people who were born on that same Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. I don't know, Kim Kardashian was born on it. Paris Hilton. Who else? What's her name? Megan. Megan was born on a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So you've got these reality TV women who, I suppose, Megan, is she reality TV? I don't know. It's all part of the soap that we're in, isn't it? But he represents it in a different way. He's a sort of new generation. He's young. He's 43 years old, and 42 years old. But he is at one with the collective because he was born on a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And I suppose it's like people born on that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in the very early 80s are now really coming of age. They are really starting to make that impact. And he was sort of elected, I think, in 2019, so a year just before the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which was at the end of 2020. And Saturn is really very, very strong. He's got an incredibly strong Saturn because Saturn is in Libra, sign of its exaltation, and it is exactly conjunct Jupiter. But there are other things going on. He has got Mars square the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. That's quite nasty, potentially. He's always going to have to watch his back with Mars square Saturn. I would guess there are a lot of people who want him dead. I'm not making any predictions here, by the way. But like El Salvador, so El Salvador, as I said, that's a chart of El Salvador, 1821. He has a Mars-Saturn square. El Salvador has a Mars-Saturn square. I don't know about this time of 8:06 a.m. Does someone really know that it became independent at 8:06 a.m.? Assuming that is correct, then of course El Salvador would have Mars exactly on the midheaven and Saturn exactly on the descendant. But I wouldn't necessarily believe that 8:06 a.m. time. But so it's almost like El Salvador needs to have a Mars-Saturn figure to sort itself out. And El Salvador, Mars in Cancer, and Bukele has Mars in Cancer. So maybe this is the right person for El Salvador. And that Saturn, as I said, is really strong. Okay, it is square Saturn. And Mars is also in the second house in Nayib Bukele's chart. Money, trying to work out the country's finances, and Bitcoin as part of it. I wouldn't really associate Mars in Cancer with Bitcoin, though. Mars in Cancer strikes me as being a little too traditional for wanting to do that. But still, I think that is it is quite an impressive chart. Oh, another thing, the Sun. He's got the Sun exactly conjunct the node in Leo. So he's a Leo. He obviously has a high opinion of himself. And it is conjunct the North Node. Traditionally, the North Node is a benefic. The South Node is a malefic. So the North Node probably gives the Sun strength. And also it's the way he should be going. The North Node is our direction. Sun in Leo is kind of very arrogant, very into self-belief, but perhaps with North Node conjunct the Sun, it might be the right thing for him to be doing. Venus, look at Venus. Venus is conjunct Regulus. It's always good to have Venus conjunct Regulus. Regulus is the royal star. And it's quite close to the IC, though. So there's a bit of grounding in that chart. The chart is not all up at the top. Oh, Moon is in Taurus. Moon is in Taurus. So he's got the Sun in its own sign, which is of Leo, and he's got the Moon in Taurus, which is Moon is exalted in Taurus. And the Moon is square the Sun, but maybe because the Moon is in Taurus in its exaltation, square the Sun, which is in its own sign, maybe that's not such a bad thing. I want to think more about Bukele's chart, because I think it is a really very powerful chart, and we should not underestimate the power of that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, because it's exact. Now, he's not the only famous person from El Salvador. Of course, probably the most famous person is Oscar Romero. And I want to look at Oscar Romero's chart. So Oscar Romero has the Mars in Cancer. So El Salvador has the Mars in Cancer. And we saw that Bukele has Mars in Cancer. And likewise, Romero has Mars in Cancer. And Romero, we do have a time, I think it's 3 a.m. In Ciudad Barrios in El Salvador. And so Mars was exactly rising when he was born. So Mars, if you've got Mars exactly rising, that might suggest something of someone who fights. That's one way. Mars in Cancer would be someone who is quite passionate, someone who has strong beliefs. But he's got Mars conjunct the South Node in Cancer, but with the North Node in the 7th house. So I suppose you could say the North Node in the 7th house. You could say someone who wants to devote their life to other people. So I suppose you could say with Romero's chart that that's what he did. But yes, he does have Mars conjunct the South Node. Or did he had Mars conjunct the South Node? And, with Mars in Cancer, ascendant Cancer, Moon in Cancer, you do get a sense of compassion there. And so that's his chart. Now, I had issues with his chart in terms of understanding. I was trying to look at progressions and directions and solar returns. I didn't get very far with that. I'd love to look at the chart of his death and say, oh yeah, well, we can see this happened and that happened and that, and it all makes perfect sense. I didn't really get a sense of that. And that's not entirely what I want to focus on. I mean, what about his return? So he was murdered on March the 24th, 1980. He'd just given this broadcast in which he'd asked the El Salvador army to stop their repression, and the powers that be in El Salvador really got upset by the fact he was making a direct appeal to sort of ordinary soldiers in his sermon, I think, was it a sermon or a broadcast he made? He made regular broadcasts. So he was just seen to be too dangerous. He seemed to be threatening the cohesion of the El Salvador army, and so that's why he was assassinated. And just after he'd said mass. Which is part of a reason why, I suppose why he, why he became such a global figure after his death, why he became so famous. And his solar return just prior to his, I'm not saying we're going to see anything dramatic here, by the way. Would have been his 1979 solar return. So this is his 1979 solar return. What's powerful about this is the fact that he's got his Mars. We see his ascendant coming up again. So if we compare his solar return to his natal chart. Let's just do that. We'll put. So inside is Oscar Romero's horoscope. On the outside is the positions of the planets when he was at his solar return just before he was murdered. you can see that the ascendant is at 10. So he had a repeated ascendant. So when you're doing a solar return and you see the same ascendant as the birth ascendant, that's often a hint that it might be an important year. And here we have in his solar return, don't just have the ascendant at the birth ascendant. We have Mars at 4 degrees Cancer. So we get a repeated signature. He had Mars rising when he was born, and he had Mars rising at the time of his solar return before he was assassinated. That is a reminder of Bobby Kennedy's chart. So in Bobby Kennedy's natal chart, he has Mars in the 7th house. And then Bobby Kennedy, in his solar return, set for where he was born in November 1967, just before his 1968 assassination, Mars was again in the 7th house. So when we see a repeated theme in a solar return, so it's repeated from the natal chart, that's often a sign that it's a big year. And when you've got something like Mars on the ascendant in the natal chart or on a descendant, that's a warning. So I think the solar return was hinting that something was wrong, or that he was in danger. Also, you could see the solar return, we had Jupiter was combust. Jupiter was approaching his sun, so he had this transit of his sun. Jupiter conjunct Sun can represent death, but of course Jupiter is also quite a religious planet, and so Jupiter conjunct the Sun, a death of a priest, you could see Sun conjunct Jupiter. That would sort of fit. And Romero, in his horoscope, he has a Sun opposition Uranus. So Sun opposition Uranus. Uranus is in the 8th, Sun in Leo, opposition, which is a house of death, and so Sun in the 2nd, opposition Uranus. There may be a warning in his natal chart about him being vulnerable to an early death or a violent death, Uranus in the 2nd, and then in his natal chart, in his solar return, just before his assassination, there's the Sun Jupiter conjunction. Then there is the assassination itself. So he was murdered on March 24th, 1980 at 6:30 p.m. in San Salvador, and I suppose what gets me about the assassination chart is the fact that Mars is conjunct the North Node in Leo. Why is that important? Well, I think it's important because Romero has in his chart, if we go back to Oscar Romero's chart, he has Mars conjunct the South Node when he was born, and so when he was murdered, Mars was conjunct the North Node, and so Mars conjunct the North Node kind of suggests that he'd come full circle, and that this was his destiny. This was his supreme moment. Mars conjunct the North Node. Unfortunately, it was a very sort of violent, something very violent, but it was Mars conjunct the North Node. And of course, when you've got Mars conjunct the North Node, Mars is, of course, strongly emphasized there. And look at, there's Uranus. Those sort of Mars was just separating from a square to Uranus, and square the North Node. The lunation beforehand, one should always look at the lunation or beforehand of a big event. So looking at the lunation just before the assassination, that's a lunation for March the 16th. So notice that there's Cancer rising again in a lunation. And so he's got, what, 12 Cancer rising? So his rising sign was in the Ramirez Cancer rising sign was there on his same as the ascendant, and obviously we've got the Mars conjunct the North Node. Now, finally, I want to look at one other event, and that is his canonization. So it took a long time for him to be canonized. I think, to begin with, the Church dragged its feet. I mean, he's an obvious candidate for canonization. I mean, someone caring about the poor and being assassinated just after he said Mass. But he was canonized on October the 14th, 2018. I don't know what time. It was late morning. I'm not saying there's anything particularly dramatic about the canonization. Well, in fact, there's one thing that's dramatic about the canonization. One thing which is absolutely amazing about this canonization. At least I found it amazing. So what I want to do is, so this is a moment, this is set for the Vatican City. I think there are quite a few other people who are being canonized, but this is the moment he became a saint. Here is the connection. So in a wheel, we have got Romero's natal chart. The outer wheel is the chart of his canonization. So that's when he becomes a saint. And of course, he's been dead for some time. He's been dead for pretty much 40 years. So the question is, do transits work after you're dead? And which made me think about Chiron and the Chiron return. So he would be 2018, he would be, 101? Chiron takes 50 around, I believe Chiron takes around 51 years to go round. And Romero's Chiron was at 29, when he was born, was at 2910 Pisces. So at around the age of 51, he would have had a Chiron return. Chiron would have returned to where it was when he was born. And likewise, at the age of 101, he would have had a Chiron return. And so you can see that Chiron, at the time when he was assassinated, when he was canonized, was at 2912 Pisces. His own Chiron is at 2910 Pisces. So Chiron was exactly conjunct his Chiron when he was canonized. So I suppose that completely feeds into the wounded healer, doesn't it? I mean, he was someone who was trying to look after the poor, and who was murdered, not just wounded, he was murdered for looking after the poor. He has Chiron in his natal chart, he has Chiron in the 9th house, very religious house. And when he is canonized, the day he is canonized, Chiron, he has a Chiron return. And just to show you that it really was his Chiron return, I did a chart for. I asked this program to put up a chart for a Chiron return, and just to demonstrate that this was a day of his Chiron return. I mean, he had several Chiron returns because of retrograde motion over 2018 and around there. But if you look, this is a chart for his Chiron return. See, October the 14th, day of his canonization, was there it is, his Chiron at 2910. So he was canonized absolutely canonized within a few hours of his Chiron return. And I thought, that was really impressive. I mean, I know I've had my doubts about Chiron, but I think the Romero canonization is really good evidence that we should be looking at Chiron, at least in certain charts. Maybe not for everyone, but it certainly impressed me. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about El Salvador. I hope you found that of some interest. As I said, I found the Chiron thing pretty amazing. If you enjoyed this video, I would be grateful if you were to indicate that you liked it by pressing the appropriate button. If you enjoyed the video and you're not subscribed, I'd also be grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. Anyway, thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.